Hi, everybody, and welcome to this session of Limitless. And I want to talk to you today about the topic, the language of obligation. The language of obligation. Kind of an interesting title, and I'm going to unpack this. First of all, what is obligation? And then what is it that I mean about the language? So let's first talk about obligation. Is that a good word? Is that a negative feeling, a positive feeling for you? Obligation could be positive in some scenarios. And in other scenarios, when we feel obligated or obliged, it could be more of a heavy, de energizing. It doesn't give us energy. And so it's always interesting to look at different emotions that we have as a human, as a person, and evaluate for ourselves, is this something that's giving me power or something that's draining me of energy? This is the way I like to look at emotion and feeling of late. I think it's a great way to evaluate it. And so, because as a human being, we're going to have a wide range of emotions throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, and learning how to know what we're feeling, assess it, and process it is helpful in our everyday life. We could call it emotional intelligence. And the feeling, the emotion that I want to focus on today, as mentioned, is the feeling of obligation. Now, in general, that's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing to be obliged or to have an obligation. In fact, this is what the definition says of what is obligation. It's the condition of being morally or legally bound to do something. Another definition is a debt of gratitude for a service or favor. So, like the definition in the dictionary said, as an example for the first one, they are under no obligation to stick to the scheme. So we might say it that way. You're under no obligation. You don't have to do it. That's what we mean when we say obligation. Or the one for a debt of gratitude for a service or favor. The example that was given in the dictionary was she didn't want to be under an obligation to him. So that would also be kind of maybe a negative thing. Like someone does a favor for you and then you're feeling obligated. Like we call it strings attached, right? Something's done for you, but then you feel this obligation or you have to pay it back. Most of the time, that's not a positive, empowering feeling, is it? And obligation could be, in a very neutral sense, just the things that we are committed to or we're responsible for. So the thing is when we think about obligation and we're obligated, and I'd like you to think about it right now. I'm obligated. I'm obliged to this person or to do something, or I force myself. That's often what obligation is. When we oblige ourselves to something, it's this sense of force. So just evaluate it for yourself right now. Is that a empowering feeling or a disempowering? Now, of course, it could depend on the scenario that you're in, but in general, I would say that most people, myself included, and those that I've talked to, those that I coach, when we feel obliged and obligated, it's not on the side of empowerment. It's more on the side of heaviness. It's more on the side of it drains us. It's more on the side of like, I have to and I should. And it's like we have to force ourselves or we have to really make ourselves do it. So that's the train of thought that I want to go down for this particular session. Now, again, I'm not saying that all obligation is negative, but in general, if it is for us, then what I'm going to teach you today is going to help you in areas that you do have commitments, you do have responsibilities. There are actions that need to be taken. But how do you do it not from obligation if obligation is, not giving you the energy, not empowering you? How do you shift the feelings to still get the action done that needs to be done, but doing it from a more empowered state? Well, doesn't that sound awesome? Right? Like, I want to emphasize this too, is that there are things in life that we have committed to. There's things that we have responsibilities for. There are expectations that others have on us. And some of these things, they need to get done, right? We want to be doers. We want to be people like the Word of God says, not just a hearer, but a doer. We don't want to just also be a talker and not a doer. We want to get things done. We want to see accomplishment. We want to take action. But when we're taking it from obligation, from force, from have to, I should, often we're not as empowered as we could be. We can shift this so that we still take the same action, but we're doing it more from joy, from peace, from power, instead of obligation. I found that when we're under obligation, we could also feel resentful, right? We could resent what others expect of us. We could resent ourselves. We could resent being in a situation where we feel stuck and we just have to be doing something. I should be, I have to. By the way, that's the language of obligation, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So those feelings of resentment can build up when we're operating and taking action from obligation. Another thing that we could feel is we could just feel stuck, like I have to do this and I have no choice. Right? I have to fulfill this commitment. I have to give this money. I have to put in the time here. I have to get this project done. I have to put on a good face. I have to read my Bible. Oh, we could bring it into a spirit. I have to do this. I have to, I need to read my Bible on a daily basis and I should be praying. We can put this in the spiritual context and we're putting ourselves under obligation because we're telling ourselves what we have to and what we should be doing. And then it's this sense of stuck. I'm stuck here. Maybe you feel stuck in a relationship. I have to do this. Maybe you feel stuck in a commitment that you don't really want to be doing, but you feel stuck because of what other people expect. And you just think it's the way it has to be. You have no choice. Maybe you don't think that consciously, but somehow in your subconscious, that's what it's feeding you. You have no choice. These are not places that we want to stay. This is not the place of greatest power for our lives. As we're talking about living limitless, this is how we break the barriers of limitation. And we go into next level thinking and feeling and action. So let's look at the language of obligation. We've already said and deciphered it down that in most cases, the feeling of obligation or being obliged is a disempowering feeling, right? It's one that we maybe still are taking action. We're doing what we need to do, but it's not giving us, it's not from joy. It's not from peace. It's from force. It's from have to. It's from stuck. It's from resent or other feelings that could be coming up. So that's never good for us in the long run. So what can we do? What about the things that we do need to do? We can't change our action. Maybe you've committed a financial support to your family and they really rely on it. And that's the commitment that is there. That's the responsibility that you have. You can't just say, well, I don't want to be obliged and I'm not obligated. Or maybe at your church, you committed to work in some capacity of the church. You say, well, I just don't want to be obliged anymore. I don't want to have that negative feeling. Or maybe at your workplace, you have responsibility, or you have children. It could be anything. We can't just shuck off our responsibilities and say, well, I don't want to be obliged and I don't want to have this feeling of obligation because it's not good for me. No, this is not what I'm teaching at all. I'm teaching that we have to take action. We do have responsibilities and commitments, but how do we switch and change our internal dialogue so that the action we take is coming from power. It's coming from a greater liberty on the inside of us. Wow. Man, if we can shift ourselves inside, that's incredible. And you know how we do that? A simple tip. Simple, but profound and complex, and one that we need to keep practicing, doesn't just come automatically. We've got to practice this, is we look at the language, the words, the tone in which we're talking to ourselves. Now, that's why I called this the language of obligation, because the feeling of obligation is actually coming not from our responsibilities, not from our commitments, not from our family, not from our boss, not from anyone else. The feeling of obligation is, where is it coming from? inside of us. Oh, that means we can shift it. That means we can change it. Because see, if we think we're obliged because our spouse expects something of us, or our parents, or our kids, or our boss, or our leader expects it of us, and I'm just obliged and I have to do it, well, then it's hard to change the feeling. But if we realize that it's really coming from us and how we're interpreting the situation, the words that we're using, the language we have going on the inside of us, that can be shifted. Why? Because it's our own thoughts. It's our own beliefs. We know that how we talk to others is important, right? The words we use is very important. The tone that we use in talking to somebody else is very important. We could say the exact same words and use different tones and get totally different responses, right? Tone is extremely important. But the words used, the word choices used as well, extremely important when we talk to others, especially in delicate, confrontational situations. We want to choose our words and our tones carefully. But let's take that same principle and apply it to ourselves. What's the language we're using, just in general, for those things that we're committed to, for the actions we need to take, for the responsibilities that we have? Are we telling ourselves, I just have to do this? I should. Amy, you should be doing this. Why are you not? You should be doing this. I have no choice. I have no choice. I have to do this. I made the commitment. I made the choice. Oh, those people, they expect that of me. I have no choice. You see, if you're telling yourself that, that's where the feeling of obligation comes from, because you're telling yourself, I have to, I should, or in the negative, I shouldn't have, I never should have done that, I have no choice. That sort of language is not helping at all. Language matters. The language, the self-talk, the tone. Thoughts are things. This is a really interesting concept to understand, is that the actual thoughts we think are things. It's a thing. Think of it as a thing, not just like some words that just float through our brain. Thoughts are a thing, and it produces a response in us. Every thought that we think has some sort of substance to it. And it produces an emotional and sometimes even a physical response. So thoughts are things. When we're demanding, we're obliging ourselves, this is when we're saying to ourselves the thoughts around I have to, I should, I have no choice. And we can begin to shift the feeling of obligation by shifting our language. So let's just look at those three things that I've said several times. The language of I have to, I should, I have no choice. What if we changed, take some circumstance right now, some circumstance that's going on for you where you feel the obligation, maybe you feel resentful, maybe you feel bad, guilty because you haven't been doing something. Let me just take reading the Bible as an example, right? Because so often we tell ourselves, I should be doing this. I should read on a daily basis. And it's true. Don't get me wrong. We should be. But instead of telling ourselves, I should be and I have to, what if we changed it to I get to? I choose to. I want to. Amy, I get the privilege to read my Bible today. I mean, we can even take that off into, further thought. And man, there's people around the world right now that don't have easy access to the Word of God. And I have easy access. I get to read my Word today. How about this for exercise? How about this for physical training and the exercise instead of, I just have to work out today. How about I get to? I want to. I choose to. I'm tired, but I choose to push myself, to push my body so I'm getting stronger. I get to do this. I choose to. Wherever you're telling yourself that you have no choice in the matter, it's actually not the truth. You always have choice. You always have choice. We always have choice. Now, we don't necessarily, there's going to be consequences for every choice that we make. Okay, but we always have choice. It's part of our nature, it's part of our DNA, it's part of our God given birthright that we have will and that we have choice. God gave that to us. So you always have choice. So if you're telling yourself that you don't have a choice, it's actually not the truth. And when you tell yourself that you don't have a choice, then you put yourself in a powerless or less powerful state. When you tell yourself, I have a choice and I now choose to do it. I get to do this. I have the opportunity. I want to do this. I want to do this overall. Maybe right now in this moment, I don't feel like it, but I want to. This begins to shift and change the feelings and emotions that are coming up for us. So I love those thoughts and just minor adjustments to the language that we're using inside of us shifts us from obligation to empowered. I choose this. I have choice and I choose. I choose to continue to give this money. I choose to fulfill the commitments that I've made. I get to do this. I'm powerful. I'm a child of God. I have wisdom on the inside of me. I have grace on the inside of me. I connect with the source on the inside of me. And I am a faithful person to move forward in the actions, in the responsibilities and commitments that I have. Let's not force ourselves where it's heavy. Let's go up to a higher standard, choose, and navigate this path. I hope this helps you as we talk about the language of obligation. What is obligation? How does it feel to you? And then what's the language that's going on that's producing? What's the thoughts, the beliefs, and the language inside of you that's producing the feeling of obligation? It's not from what anyone else expects of you. It's what you're saying to yourself. That's what produces obligation. And as you shift, as you tweak, as you change the language on the inside, you may do exactly the same thing as you did before, but you're doing it from power and grace. And I guarantee that over time, it's like gonna build your muscles, and it's gonna build your joy and your peace, and it builds your power as a person to live limitless. Okay, God bless you.